welcome back to the channel. You know who it is by now.
Jimothy.
So ladies and gents, we are back with a rogue tier list. Yes, we are doing rogue today, and we know what decks are at the top of the meta, ladies and gents. We're talking Pearly, Kashtira, Dragon Link, Rescue Ace, and definitely Unchained. So those are some of the decks you can expect to run into in a high level tournament. And with the YCS season as well as the regional season starting to pick a little bit steam up, you're going to be expecting to come up against some of those decks, barring a ban list. And that is something that I need to preface as well, because we are waiting on a ban list. However, just before we get into the tier list, ladies and gents, let's just give a rundown of some of the categories. So we've got decks that you can expect to see at some point. These are like at the top of Rogue, pushing like tier 2, tier 1 potentially. So these are some of the decks you can see, but just because of their representation, you're not actually seeing them as much as either you used to or you would hope to see in order for it to be that kind of like meta deck. You've also got Strong Option. These are some of the lesser well rogue decks, but definitely in the right pilot's hands can do some damage. Then you've also got Rogue at its finest. This is just like your typical rogue deck that could potentially steal a win, but likelihood that it won't. And then you've just got Table 500 meme decks for the win. So without wasting any more time, ladies and gents, let's just get straight into it. So starting us off, we have got Altergeist, and I'm going to put this in... I'm going to put it in Rogue at its finest. Now, the reason I'm going for Rogue at its finest is Altergeist are a very interesting deck because their turn 1 setup is a lot stronger than it was previously. And with the new support, it's a lot faster. You got a lot more interaction. And the board that it sets up is actually a little bit intimidating for a lot of players, especially with Altergeist Protocol on the field. However, it is a combo deck and it does lose severely to a couple of hand traps that are in the format, Droll being one of them. You do need to do a lot of searching with Altergeist, and if you get drolled, you typically don't have any kind of like follow-up. A lot of the traps that they have are in archetype traps that aren't as powerful as some of the floodgate type traps that you've got, and they've kind of shied away from the multi-faker type control style deck with a bunch of back row. They've gone more combo heavy in if you wanted to play it that way, basically. So I'm going to put it as Rogue at its finest. A strong option, but it's not strong enough to be in the strong option category. What I do think is strong enough is Pure Synchrons. Now, this is not something that you'd typically expect to see, but if you do run into this deck, ladies and gents, boy oh boy, if you are not prepared going second, you'll get hand loot for 2, maybe even 3, potentially even 4, and they'll negate literally your first 3 card activations, and it's just absolutely crazy. So a very, very strong deck. We all know what the choke point is in the deck, basically. But with the new support, you can actually just like play around that, which is just crazy in my eyes. So if you do run into this deck, just be very cognizant of what they are doing. There are a couple of choke points or things, a couple of things that you can stop. So you need to be well aware of that. Branded, I'm going to put it in, expect to see at some point. It's branded, specifically not branded Chimera, which I would argue is like a tier 2/tier 1 deck. This is just pure branded, like the gimmick puppet stuff and all that kind of thing. Branded's kind of fell off a little bit, mainly because it's kind of solved, and a lot of the hand traps that are in the format kind of just like stump branded right there and then. Ash unbranded fusion is rough, and with the deck not playing any additional supplemental engines, you're likely to just get Ash and your turn's more or less over and done with, so you can't actually facilitate any kind of plays. So definitely something that you'd potentially would run into, but it's easily dealt with. D-Barrier is also a card, so branded is having a tough time. That's why you kind of like seeing it just kind of like hit the sidelines at the moment, and potentially people are just tired of playing it. Runic for hire, and that's what this for hire represents. Now, I'm going to put Runic in a strong option. The reason I'm putting it in strong option and not expect to see it at some point is because of the prevalence of Unchained. Some of the Runic cards just do pop cards, and with Unchained making a very, very well announced step into the meta, Runic has kind of dropped off a little bit just because the types of interactions just basically benefit the Unchained deck, which seems to be everywhere, and just popping cards is just not something you want to do against Unchained, no matter how much you're going to resolve draws and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like that's why Runic's potentially fallen off a little bit. It's still a strong deck. And the other thing that I feel as well, like Runic can't play the plethora of hand traps that some other decks can play, because it's got a couple of engines mishmashed into the deck, and you just haven't got the space for it. So a lot of the things that you would use to protect yourself, Runic can't really afford to play. And if they're going up against some of the boards that these decks are playing at the moment, they just can't play. So hence why I say it's a strong option. You could potentially see it, but it has fallen off a little bit. Next, Exo Sisters. I'm going to put it at Rogue at its finest. Depending on the format, it can play Shifter. It can play a plethora of like super strong field spells, for example. But all in all, it is a little bit of a deck that does lose to a couple of the hand traps that are in the format. Nibiru starting to make a little bit of resurgence, kind of wrecks Exo Sister. Droll's in the format. Doesn't actually affect Exo Sister that badly, but depending on what their hand is, it can do. And it's just not strong enough going second. Going first, oh boy, you better make sure you can retrieve some of those cards from the Shadow Realm, because that's where Exo Sister is going to be sending them. But I'm going to leave it at Rogue. I do really like this deck. I've got a strong affinity for it, but I feel like it's Rogue at the moment. Fluunderies, I'm going to put this at a strong option. Fluunderies loses to itself. It doesn't rely on its extra deck, which is a very, very good thing at the moment, as well as it being very normal summon reliant. But it does get stopped by, once again, some of the hand traps that we've got in our format. Droll being one of them. Like, Droll just literally shuts down this deck. And with the nature of how the deck plays, having a load of those little birds on field that have to be in attack position because they're normal summoned, it doesn't really bode well for any kind of defense. Now, it does play a lot of non-engine, which can help it get through a number of its games, but it's not always enough. And Fluunderies is its own worst enemy. It can brick at times, and it can just be unplayable, but it's a very strong option. It does have a good matchup against specifically Unchained, because they play a lot of Link monsters, and Empen just basically says no to all of that. So yeah, definitely something that you might want to keep an eye on, but Rogue at best. Blackwings, I'm going to say Rogue at its finest. It takes a super duper good pilot, and because of the representation, well, the lack of representation of Blackwings, I'm going to put it at Rogue. Very strong deck. If you can combo through the hand trap situation, you'll definitely set up a board that is very, very intimidating, with its own version of Tax Dragon, basically, as well as like Full Armor Master, which is just the towers of the game. So yeah, Rogue at its finest. Gold Pride Punk, I'm gonna put it in Rogue. Again, suffers with some of the problems that a lot of the decks do in this format. It's very, very hard plays into Droll, and Droll is a bit of a symptom of the format, because Mannadium was a deck, or is a deck basically, and it can potentially FTK you. Like, Droll will be in a format just to kind of like combat it, because if you just let Mannadium go off, for example, you just won't be able to play. So because of that, people are main decking Droll, and this hurts Gold Pride specifically Gold Pride Punk, or even like Evil Eye Gold Pride. They do add a lot of cards to their hand through their monster effects, so inherently it just plays into Droll, which is just not a good place to be in, and it can't really set up much of a board beyond that. So that's why I'm going to put it at Rogue at its finest, because it does suffer from those symptoms. I also feel personally that it's maybe like one card away from being a true like tier 2 Rogue deck. It's very, very close. It's got a lot of things going for it, but yeah, it still needs a little bit more support. Earth Machines, I'm going to put it in table 500. Super strong deck in terms of Rogue. I really like this deck, but due to the representation, I don't think it's going to be doing anything significant. I'm hoping that it does, but for the most part, it's a table 500 deck. That's where you're going to see. You're not going to see it at top tables at the end of like a YCS or a regional or anything like that, unless that one player is just like a god with Earth Machines. Sword Soul, I'm going to put as a strong option. I might actually put it in expect to see at some point, just because of the nature of Sword Soul. It's just a very, very solid deck. It does what it does. It has been doing it since its inception, and it's a very a very consistent deck in what it does. It looks to put up a couple of synchro monsters, maybe one or two back row, and then maybe like one hand trap and one follow up. So it does what it does very, very efficiently, and it can OTK you out of nowhere, especially with the prevalence of Long Young Burn, as well as Sinister Quicksing Long Young Burn. You can actually just get your opponent down to a kill shot. So yeah, but it does struggle going second at times, and with some of the boards that these cards, well, these decks are putting up at the moment, it just doesn't bode well, especially going first. It doesn't really set up an intimidating board. Maybe one or two interactions that you can like bait out, and then you can clear the board effectively. So yeah. Marincess next up. I'm gonna put Marincess in Rogue. I like the idea of Marincess, but with Pearly in the format, people are playing Kaijus, people are playing Kurikara, and Marincess, I think it's Bubble Reef, she activates in the standby phase. So before anything happens, that could potentially be cleared off the board, and you're only sitting on specifically like one monster or Marincess Aqua Argonaut. So you're sitting on one monster that could potentially just get Kaiju'd, which is which is just absolutely crazy. So yeah, it's a towers type deck. It does play very, very unique compared to all the other Cyberse decks out there, but I just feel like it's a little bit weaker, and yeah, it's probably Rogue at the moment. Mathmech, I would love to put Mathmech in a strong option, but I personally don't think it's not. I think it's Rogue. Mathmech is still powerful in terms of what the deck is actually looking to achieve. However, because of the limiting of Circular, it has to jump through a lot of hoops to get there, which invariably means that you're just jumping into the realm of hand traps. You're playing into Nib, you're playing into Imperms, you're playing into Droll, you're playing into Ash Blossom. You need to do a lot to get that Mathmech Circular out of your deck and then actually resolve it. And again, with Droll in the format, you might get the search for the Circular, but then it's dead because you run the Droll. So yeah, I think it's Rogue at the moment. So yeah. Ninjas, I'm going to put in table 500. I like Ninjas. I think they're a very, very powerful deck. I feel like they need a little bit more in the way of potentially even just another engine to be able to supplement what Ninjas are doing, because sitting on one monster and hoping that it resolves is a very, very difficult place to be in, to be honest. So I feel like Ninjas need a little bit of help in that respect, but again, due to its representation, its coverage, I don't think it's a strong option at the moment. I do think it's a good deck, but I don't think it's a strong option at the moment. Maybe with the correct pilot and the correct build, it could do some stuff. Mekanko, I'm going to go with strong option, and the reason I'm doing this is because it plays Kaijus, Lava Golems, Sphere Modes, and it can OTK you very, very, very easily. So that is why I'm putting it as a strong option. I don't think you'll see a lot of Mekanko just because of the nature of the deck. Going first, it doesn't really do much. It puts up probably one, maybe two interactions at most. And those interactions are very easy to play around. They're actually telegraphed. They don't actually come from any kind of like hidden aspect of the deck. You can see exactly what they're going to do. And it requires a few things to go right in order for it to do it. So that's why I'm putting it at Rogue. Well, we're putting it as a strong... In fact, I'm going to put it at Rogue. Yeah, I'm going to put it at Rogue. It is strong, but I just don't feel like it's strong enough. Table 500, Dinomorphia, again, a deck I really, really do enjoy. I love this deck. I think it's just crazy. I love playing it. It's very unique in what it does. You have to have Balls of Steel to play, but it is a table 500 deck. It loses so hard in time, which is the reason why I stopped playing it recently, because typically you're grinding with your opponent. You force your opponent into a grind state, and although Wrexham is very, very powerful, Psychic and Punisher is a card, there are instances where you just can't get into it, and that's where Dinomorphia falters, especially if you're in games 2 or 3 and you go in second, for example. Like, it's just really, really hard to play. So yeah, I'm going to put Dinomorphia in table 500. Runic Stun, I'm just going to put it as I'm going to put it at Rogue at its finest. It's Runic Stun strong, but it's the mixture with other engines which makes it as strong as it is, which makes it like a meta threat, basically. By itself, it does have some quirky interactions, and it does do what it does very efficiently, but I just feel like without the addition of any kind of like supplemental engine, it's just not strong enough. Salamangreat, I'm going to put it as a strong... I'm going to put it as a Rogue at its finest. Like, I actually thought about this. Salamangreat used to end on Salamangreat Sunlight Wolf and 2 set back row and a couple of hand traps. And now what I feel like it ends on is Salamangreat Raging Phoenix, which is a link 4, and 2 set back row, which is not far off what it was doing anyway. Granted, you do get a pop 4, which is just absolutely insane. You could clear someone's field if you time the interaction right. But I don't feel like it does enough. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I haven't had enough experience with the deck, which I haven't, which is a deck that I own. And Salamangreat does have a great place in my heart, just because it was the first meta deck that I tried to invest into, and then it got hit on the ban list. So, yeah, interesting one. Scareclaw, I'm going to put this here. Expect to see this deck at some point. I think Scareclaw's an amazing rogue deck. Very strong, very slept on. Because of the overshadowing of Kashtira as well as Mannadium, Scareclaw doesn't get the respect that it deserves, and I feel like it's a very strong deck. Like, Scareclaw Tryhard is just amazing. It's very difficult out depending on the type of deck you're playing against, and yeah, I think it's a very strong deck, especially with the Brave engine as well. It just adds another layer of interaction to an already strong enough like board or deck. So expect to see this deck at some point. In fact, I'm going to put it at strong option. I wouldn't expect to see it because not that many people are on like Scarecrow Brave, but I feel like it's very, very strong. What you would expect to see Sprite, ladies and gents. This encompasses all the Sprite variants. Mouthy Sprite, Runic for Hire Sprite, any kind of Sprite variant. I think it's still a strong deck. It does need to get touched on the ban list if it wants to be like, if the ban list wants to be balanced in any way, just because of the nature of Sprite, it just can combo off. One thing I've noticed about Sprite with the most recent hits, it doesn't have the best follow-up, so yeah, there's always that, but it's a very, very strong deck, and expect to see. It's just as simple as that, ladies and gents. Along with Plant Link, I'm going to put Plant Link in Rogue at its finest. Now, it is a strong deck, but I feel like to play this deck, you need to be like superhumanly big brain. And there's some big brain plant players out there, but not everybody is that well versed with the deck. And I feel like you need to be in order to play this deck correctly, because of the way the nature of the combo works. The amount of like engine cards you've got in your deck, potential bricking, you're playing a vanilla monster. Yeah, there's a lot of things that need to go right, and there's a lot of like nuances and interactions that you need to be very cognizant about in order to pilot the deck correctly. So I'm going to put it at Rogue just because of representation and the fact that the people that do play this deck and play it well have like really good tournament results, but the people that don't play it well and just pick it up because of the hype just kind of bring the deck down a little bit. In my opinion, I could be wrong, but yeah. Tierlist, I'm going to put it at strong option. The only reason it's not I think Tierlist is probably a meta deck, but because of the prevalence of D-Shifter and Kashtira, it just dies. Like, you need your graveyard, and Tierlist just literally plays out of the graveyard. Once Kashtira goes, I'll be honest, ladies and gents, expect to see this deck in some way, shape or form, because it does so much. If you put the combo variant together and just play a plethora of like fusion monsters, this deck goes off. I've seen it put 5 fusion monsters on the field, 3 of them on their turn 0 on their opponent's turn, which is just crazy. So a very, very strong deck, just not prevalent at the moment, just because of the existence of Kashtira Rise Heart, which if he goes, you will definitely see a resurgence in this deck. Vanquish Soul, a deck that I've been playing recently. I'm going to put this in expect to see at some point. It's not quite tier 2 yet, in my opinion. There are a few like weaknesses of the deck. I feel like it just doesn't put enough up going first. But nonetheless, if your opponent is not well versed with the deck, they will just lose. And it's got a really good Kashtira matchup because a lot of the Kashtira cards target, and you can kind of like dodge the targeting effects. I feel like it's very strong in that regard, and that's why you probably see a little bit more Vanquish Soul over some of the other decks. And in fact, I'm going to move this one up. It's probably at the top of expect to see at some point. So yeah, along with this deck, which is probably the one, Mannadium. Let me move this back. Mannadium's crazy. Mannadium is probably one of the bigger reasons why Drove's in the format, just because if you don't have anything or any kind of interaction with your opponent, they can literally just FTK you going first. They'll set up like the Calamities lock, which means you just can't play the game. which is absolutely crazy. Or what I've seen players doing now is ending on like Appaloosa, Bestial Dispata, as well as a Baron de Fleur with a counter trap set. So effectively, like, depending on what deck you're playing against, that's more or less an FTK. If you can play through that board, you're very, very well versed in the deck. So yeah, something to keep in mind. Definitely going to see him in ADM running about. Plunder Patrol Brave, it is rogue at its finest. It's probably not the strongest Plunder Patrol or Brave deck, as well as Plunder Patrol Runic. I mean, Runic for hire is probably just a better option, just because of the way that the deck functions. And Plunders are always going to be, this is probably my favorite deck, ladies and gents. I really do like Plunder Patrol, but I feel like it just can't keep up with the meta at the moment. Maybe the addition of one more card, it might be able to do so. And then finally, I'm going to put Heroes as a strong option. Dark Angel looks crazy. Plasma's crazy. OTK's out of nowhere. It does just have a few glaring weaknesses. Nibiru, which is just, yep, it is what it is. It can now play a counter trap, which is nice, or just some kind of negation, especially if it gets the setup with the trap going first. So yeah, definitely a strong option. You probably might even run into this, and if you do, you need to be very, very aware. Make sure you got your draws in hand ready to go, ladies and gents. But that is it, ladies and gents. Now, obviously, I did not cover every deck. I can't. But if there are any decks that you feel like I should have mentioned on this list, definitely get at me in that comment section below. And as always, we find ourselves at the end of another video. If you did like this content, you know what to do by now. Hit that like button, share, subscribe, all of that beautiful good stuff. And I will definitely see you guys on the next video. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.